Seleucid Empire, one of the major empires that followed the death of Alexander the Great. So, after Alexander passed away in 323 BCE, things got chaotic. He didn't leave a clear successor. All he supposedly said was that his kingdom should go to the strongest. Naturally, this led to a massive power struggle between his top generals, which we now call the Wars of the Diadochi, or Wars of the Successors. Now, these generals, Cassander, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, Antigonus, and Seleucus, ended up carving out their own chunks of Alexander's empire. Out of all of them, Seleucus I Nicator was probably the most successful. Why? Well, he managed to build a multicultural empire that blended both Eastern and Western cultures, something even Alexander himself aimed for. At its height, the Seleucid Empire stretched from the Mediterranean all the way to the Indus Valley, with a pretty impressive system of governance, religious tolerance, and booming trade. But as you can imagine, holding such a vast empire together wasn't easy. Over time, the different regions started wanting their own independence, and the central government just couldn't keep everything in line. To make matters worse, the rise of Rome posed a serious threat. Rome didn't like competition, and the successors of Seleucus drifted away from his original vision. By 100 BCE, the empire was starting to fall apart, and in 63 BCE, it all came to an end when the Roman general Pompey finished the job and took over. But how did Seleucus get to that point in the first place? Well, after Alexander's death, his generals split the empire. Seleucus managed to grab Babylon and much of Central Asia, but he wasn't done yet. After battling and negotiating with a lot of former comrades, including a war with the Indian king Chandragupta Maurya, Seleucus eventually controlled an enormous territory. By 300 BCE, he had established his rule over key regions like Mesopotamia, Syria, and Armenia. He even founded two capitals, Antioch in the west and Seleucia in the east. Seleucus ran things from Antioch and had his son, Antiochus I, co-rule with him to help manage the empire. And just when things seemed stable, Seleucus was pulled into more drama. In 282 BCE, two members of the royal court of Lysimachus came to him, asking for help after Lysimachus killed his own son. This gave Seleucus the excuse he needed to take over Anatolia. He marched in, took it from Lysimachus, and soon became the last remaining Diadochi. He was planning to invade Greece next, but before he could do that, he was assassinated in 281 BCE by Ptolemy Cyranous, one of the very people he had helped. And after the death of Seleucus, Antiochus I took over and kept pushing his father's idea of blending Greek culture with those of the Near East. It wasn't just about ruling over diverse people, it was about merging cultures to create a more unified empire. Scholar Cormac O'Brien put it perfectly when he said that the Seleucids knew they couldn't rule as Greeks alone in a world filled with non-Greeks. So they took on a bit of both. They embraced the gods, traditions, and customs of the ancient civilizations that came before them, merging them with Hellenistic values. This was the heart of Hellenism, melding East and West into a vibrant new era, and the Seleucid Empire really embodied that. But ruling such a vast empire wasn't just about blending cultures. The Seleucids, like the Achaemenid Persians before them, followed a centralized system where the emperor held supreme power, but with decentralized regional governance. The empire was divided into satrapies, regions overseen by governors who handled the bureaucratic side of things, while military matters were kept separate and under the control of generals. This split of authority helped prevent any governor from becoming too powerful or attempting a coup. Yet, even with this system in place, the Seleucid Empire faced its fair share of rebellion. After Seleucus' death, regions like Armenia and Cappadocia tried to break away. On top of that, Ptolemy II of Egypt decided to claim Syria and its valuable trade routes, triggering a war with Antiochus I. And as if that wasn't enough, King Nicomedes of Bithynia invited the Celts into Anatolia, who caused chaos by attacking cities and extorting money from anyone who couldn't pay them off. Antiochus I managed to turn things around when he defeated the Celts at the Battle of the Elephants in 275 BCE, using war elephants to crush their forces. The Celts were quickly brought to heel, and even ended up working as mercenaries for the Seleucids. Antiochus followed his father's example, elevating his son, Antiochus II, to co-rule, and together they managed to hold the empire together, at least until the end of Antiochus II's reign. Around 247 BCE, Arsaces of Parthia broke away from the empire and founded what would become the Parthian Empire, setting off a wave of secession. Not long after, Diadochi of Bactria also declared independence, creating the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom. Unfortunately, Antiochus II's successors, Seleucus II and Seleucus III, were unable to recover these lost territories, as the empire was struggling with a faltering economy and the growing threat of the Celts, who had firmly established themselves in Galatia. But things started looking up with Antiochus III, also known as Antiochus the Great. He came to power in 223 BCE and set out to restore the empire to its former glory. For over 2 decades, he led campaigns across the empire, from the Levant to India, regaining lost territories like Bactria and Asia Minor. He even won back Judea and Syria from Egypt. While Antiochus was focused on rebuilding the empire, Rome was busy defeating Carthage in the Second Punic War, and once Rome was done with that conflict, it turned its attention to other Mediterranean powers, including the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus III knew he might be next on Rome's list, and despite being warned by his advisor Hannibal Barca, he decided to strike first. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. He lost to the Romans at Thermopylae in 191 BCE, and again at Magnesia in 190 BCE. The Treaty of Apamea in 188 BCE forced him to withdraw from Anatolia, pay a hefty indemnity, and agree never to make war in Europe again. Antiochus III's once promising campaign ended with his death in 187 BCE, while looting a temple in Luristan to gather funds for the indemnity. And now let's talk about Antiochus IV Epiphanes and the chaos that erupted during his rule, especially with the Jews in Judea. After the assassination of his brother Seleucus IV in 175 BCE, Antiochus IV took over. He wasn't exactly your traditional ruler. He had been a hostage in Rome and picked up a lot of Roman ideas. But this Roman connection didn't really stop him from pushing his own agenda, especially when it came to expanding his influence. He went to war with Egypt and almost took full control of it. He even allowed Ptolemy VI to stay on the throne as a puppet ruler, which kept Egypt running smoothly. That way, the grain shipments to Rome were safe, and the Romans didn't feel the need to interfere. But when Ptolemy VI and his brother tried to get rid of Antiochus' control, Antiochus returned to Egypt to crush them. That's when things took an unexpected turn. When Antiochus was ready for his second campaign in Egypt, Rome stepped in. Well, actually, one man, Gaius Popilius Linas, an older Roman ambassador. He confronted Antiochus in a bold way, famously drawing a circle around him in the dirt and demanding an answer on whether he would retreat before he stepped out of it. Antiochus knew what defying Rome would mean, so he wisely agreed to back off. At the same time, back in Judea, things were boiling over. There was a growing conflict between the Jews who wanted to maintain their religious traditions and those who had embraced Greek customs. It all came to a head when Jason, a member of the Oniot family, paid Antiochus to be installed as high priest, replacing his brother, Onias III. Jason even went as far as to change his name to fit in more with the Greek influence and encouraged a lot of Hellenistic practices, which rubbed many Jews the wrong way, especially when he built a gymnasium where people exercised in the nude, right in the holy area of Jerusalem. That was a huge cultural clash. And if that wasn't enough, Jason sent a messenger named Menelaus to Antiochus with money, but Menelaus ended up bribing Antiochus to make him the high priest instead. This power play caused chaos in Jerusalem, and Jason didn't take it sitting down. He raised a small army and fought back. This only made things worse when Antiochus, known for his heavy-handedness, declared that the Jewish temple should be dedicated to him, with sacrifices made in his honor. That was the final straw for many. What followed was the Maccabean revolt, led by Judas Maccabeus, who fought to restore Jewish religious practices and rededicate the temple, a moment still celebrated today as Hanukkah. Antiochus IV couldn't get a grip on the situation, and after a reign filled with conflict, he died in 163 BCE, leaving behind an empire in decline. After Antiochus IV, the Seleucid dynasty just spiraled further into chaos. His successors, rather than ruling with the grand vision of their ancestor, Seleucus I, became more focused on keeping their own power intact. The empire shrank, and piracy in Cilicia started to become a major problem. The Seleucids, desperate for resources like slaves, often turned a blind eye to piracy, even benefiting from it at times. As if that wasn't enough, the empire was also being torn apart by internal intrigue. Take Cleopatra Thea, for example. She was married off multiple times to different rulers, including Demetrius II and Antiochus VII, as part of various power plays. Cleopatra Thea eventually killed her own son, Seleucus V, and tried to do the same to another son, Antiochus Agrippos, who forced her to drink the poison she had intended for him. By the time Rome fully entered the scene during the Mithridatic Wars, the Seleucid Empire was a shadow of its former self. It had been reduced to a small kingdom in Syria, and when the Roman general Pompey defeated the pirates and took control of Syria, the Seleucid monarchy officially came to an end. The last Seleucid ruler, Philip II Ptolemaic, barely made a mark on history. His failed attempts to hold on to power were a sad reflection of what the once mighty Seleucid Empire had become.